everyone. Welcome to another edition of Vinyl Fetish. We're back. It's been a while. Well, it's summer. You know how summers go. I had to kind of take care of my brother this summer. That took up a lot of energy, and getting my kid ready for 4th grade. Cozy will be back up here in the vinyl attic soon. We'll do some videos together. But we've got another album in our 100. It's not a countdown. It's sort of a list of 100 albums that should be in your vinyl collection. If you're a vinyl collector and you're looking for things that sort of would really fit nicely into your vinyl collection, we're going to give you 100 albums and kind of the background on them that should be in every record collector's collection. And so today, I'm very pleased to announce what we're going to be talking about today, which is the Stooges' first album, entitled The Stooges. Came out in early August of 1969, about 10 days before the Woodstock Festival in upstate New York, and it couldn't be more different than Woodstock. In many ways, there was sort of a weird relationship with Woodstock to this, that there is this end of the 60s things happening that's kind of represented on this record. First of all, let's deal with how people talk about this album. People often describe this album as a proto-punk album, meaning before there was punk rock, there was the antecedents of punk and the things that led up to it. You know, it's always this challenge to figure out when does a genre start? When did bebop start? When did rock and roll start? When did house start? So trying to say, you know, on this date, you know, punk rock was born is a fool's errand. But there were some albums. There was a lot of cool garage bands. I think of bands like the Standells being very punk rock. There was the Velvet Underground's first album in 1967 is, you know, very important to the history of punk rock. But probably the one that there is the most consensus on is this first Stooges album. This band roaring out of Detroit, same scene as the MC5, very familiar to the scene of the MC5. But the Stooges' roots weren't like punk. They were more psychedelic. In fact, the name of the band before they were the Stooges was the Psychedelic Stooges, fronted by a young Iggy Pop. There's young Iggy. There he is also, his first band was called the Iguanas. So he got tagged Iggy because he was the singer of the Iguanas. If you never knew that, now you know. And this album comes out on Elektra Records and is the same label as The Doors and is a huge flop. Doesn't really make any waves. Rolling Stone talks about it as a lot of noise. Village Voice referred to it as dumb rock. It was not seen as like the most important record to ever come out. But now, all these years later, like 69, you can count how many years ago that was, it's seen as like a really significant moment in music history. Why? Well, first of all, it's wide open. It is not like anything else, not like any of the, you know, the kind of hippie stuff or any of the jammy stuff. Although there is an influence of Jimi Hendrix in here. Ron Ashton, the guitarist, talked about some of these tracks being influenced by Hendrix's playing. Remember, Hendrix doesn't really have an album out in 1969. You know, Access Bold as Love, and then Electric Ladyland in 68, and then there's sort of nothing officially from Jimi Hendrix. So there is this void in this notion of melding psychedelia and rock, and the tracks sort of describe what's happening. It opens with the song 1969 okay, all across the USA, and it's kind of like the 60s are ending. The 60s, all the stuff that has happened in the 60s, a lot of stuff happened in the 60s. If you think about the difference between 1960 and 1969, from Beehives to Landing on the Moon to She Loves You to, you know, Come Together, the 60s are an incredible transformative period, especially for young people. So it was like, you know, the 60s are ending. 70s are going to be different. In fact, on their next album, they had a song called 1970 that sort of welcomed the 70s in. But 1969, and then the next track is I Want to Be Your Dog. I mean, this is just so punk rock before we even had a word for it. Now I Want to Be Your Dog. I mean, how many punk rock bands have covered that song? And there is one of I don't know if it's the most famous songs, but I think one of the songs that had the biggest impact is the lead song on side 2, which is No Fun to hang around. And he's just this like outsider, nothing's going your way, the world sucks, I'm just gonna express how frustrated I am with the world. The No Fun song becomes kind of a mantra in the early punk rock movement, from the Ramones to the Sex Pistols. In fact, the Sex Pistols' last gig at Winterland in San Francisco in January 1968, they only played one song, and it was the Stooges' No Fun. That was the one song, and then Johnny Rotten famously said, "Does it ever feel like you've been cheated?"
No fun, my babe. No fun. You're no fun, my babe. You're no fun. Fun to be alone, walking by myself. Fun to be alone in love when nobody else.
That was it. The Sex Pistols doing the Stooges. There wouldn't be the Sex Pistols if not for the Stooges. This record was produced by John Cale of the Velvet Underground. Second Velvet Underground reference. And he mixed it, and the record label didn't like his mix. So actually Iggy himself, with the president of Elektra, went back and mixed it, and the version that you get on this release is the Iggy Pop mix. The original John Cale version is now available on sort of a legacy edition anniversary release. You can hear and compare and contrast the differences. There's this weird song. I never know what to do when I'm playing the third. There's only 3 songs on side 1. 1969, I Want to Be Your Dog, and We Will Fail, which is this 10.5-minute weird Apocalypse Now psychedelia chant. I don't know what it is. And the reason that song is on there is they didn't have enough songs to fill up a whole album. They just didn't. They were kind of a new band, and they didn't like the songs that they had. And John Cale said, "We need something." So they did this weird psychedelic jam. It really sounds like something that could have been on Electric Ladyland. John Cale plays violin on it, so it sounds a little bit more like a Velvet Underground release. Yeah, and so Real Cool Time is my favorite track. I mean, it's just really, really wide open. And you can hear the reverberations from this album on everything forward. And not just punk rock, the grunge movement has incredible amounts of debt to pay to the Stooges' first couple records. Mudhoney, Touch Me, I'm Sick is a complete lift-off of a Stooges song. So when we're talking about sort of genres, this is a record that sort of represents the beginning of thinking about what that music is supposed to be like, what that aesthetic of punk rock is supposed to be like. The Stooges did a second album in 1970, and then they kind of took a break for a little bit and had a kind of guitarist lineup change. In 1973, they come out with Raw Power. There's Iggy in all his power, and then the Stooges kind of fall apart. There's been some Stooges reunions that have been like, all right, but they're nothing like the original. And then Iggy starts teaming up with David Bowie in the mid-70s and starts his solo career, producing incredible amount of music. Some of the best albums, including those Berlin albums in the 1970s that he did with Iggy, and still makes music to this day. I can't count how many Iggy albums there are. I've made Iggy playlists from all his releases. There's tons of them. He's still making music. He's still performing live. He still won't put his shirt on, which is totally okay. Ig, you're an old man. We can see you, be you. But Iggy really, coming out of this was a game changer. And I have to say, for a lot of us in my generation, Iggy was the thing that keyed us into the punk rock aesthetic and why punk rock matters. When I was 16 years old, I saw Iggy Pop play an all-ages show at a club in Atlanta called 688, 1980, and it quite literally changed my life. As the kid who got picked on, that was our guy. Like, Iggy is up there bleeding for our sins. If Iggy can weather the storm, so can I. I mean, so many of us have gained so much strength out of the raw power of Iggy Pop. And it all really starts here on this record, The Stooges, 1969 on Elektra Records. Get it in your collection. Part of our 100 albums you must have. Okay, that's a quick love ode to the first Stooges album. Now I Want to Be Your Dog. Next time on Vinyl Fetish, we're going to talk about another album that's grown. I mean, when this came out, nobody really listened to it. No, it wasn't a big record if you think of all the stuff that was out in 1969, like The Fifth Dimension. Let the sun shine You know, it's kind of like the Velvet Underground's first album. When it came out, unless you were an Andy Warhol scene in New York in 1967, nobody knew about the Velvet Underground. Now everybody knows about the Velvet Underground. It's sort of the same way with the Stooges record. So some of these records just sort of gain a little bit of cachet, a little bit of appreciation, a little bit of respect over the years. So next time we're going to talk about an album that kind of did that as well, which is the third Dire Straits album, Making Movies. And we're going to talk about how that fits into the early 80s aesthetic next time on Vinyl Fetish. Iggy matters. Iggy Pop still matters. Still matters. He's still out there touring. This record matters. This music matter. You matter. Let's talk about it.